This lecture has to do with some of the closer, closer look at the Sunnis and the Shia, uh, including where they are, and then some of the specific differences. We talked about the major difference before, but we're going to get into some other differences that are seen among them. The Sunni and Shia have differences, there's no question about it. And if you work with Shia, you will certainly have different experiences than with the Sunni. We need to be aware of these differences and sensitive to it. We're talking about Muslims in their unity, disunity, and their extremism. I should have mentioned previously when you had the chart, the Sunni and Shia, that you noted, perhaps you didn't notice, but the Sufis reach into, you can get Sufis both Sunni and Shia. In other words, it's not just the Sunnis that are into Sufism. And the same is true of extremism as well. It's not just the Shia. Sometimes people say, well, it's only the Shia who are into extremism, because look at Iran, 1979. No, you can get extremism in both. The Sunnis, of course, are the majority in every country. Perhaps there are over 50 countries in the world with a majority of Muslim, and it's a majority Islam, majority in every Muslim country except Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon. I don't know of any other country where the Shiites dominate. What does it mean? It means Sunnah. It comes from the word Sunnah, meaning practice. There are the four schools of Islam, and we could teach a whole course on the Sharia, what the major decisions are. But again, the question is over who should lead the community, the Muslim community. Should it be the man best qualified, or should it be the person who has that divine light? In other words, has a connection with God and through the prophet, has the prophet's blood in his veins. You see why they would have chosen Ali. You see, Ali was a cousin. He had the prophet's blood in his veins, and he was married to Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. So that's the reason that they would say, the Shiites would say, you have to have that to be a good leader. And whereas the Sunnis would say, no, you choose the leader on the basis of his ability. And they got this out of the Arab culture. This is what the Arabs basically did. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, was certainly a man of ability, and he was chosen because of his, I think he was stable. He was obviously a man of patience, a man of who would not go to pieces. In fact, when Muhammad died, it seemed like the Muslim community, people couldn't believe it. Umar himself went to pieces, but Abu Bakr stood up in the mosque and said, "Oh people, as for Muhammad, he's dead, but God does not die." So he was a man of good sense. Now, the last caliph that they had in Islamic history was in AD 1258, and so the caliphate started off with a bang, but it was decreasing in its importance, and then the entire institution was abolished in 1924 by Ataturk in Turkey. And the Muslims have been pining for it. We could say that the Muslims in India, for example, when the rug was pulled out from under them in 1924, they had lost what they felt was the only legitimate type of Muslim government. And many Muslims would like to bring it back again. They're not comfortable completely with democracy. Democracy doesn't seem to work, and it's true. It's true. It certainly hasn't worked in some of our own regimes here. We've tried to push democracy in the Middle East. It hasn't worked. And Muslims are not always, they're not comfortable with it. In other words, they look at democracy as a Western invention. They look at democracy as putting man on the throne rather than God. And so they've had problems with it. They've wondered what kind of government will work. And even when they have adopted democracy, it's been some kind of a qualifying state, social democracy or some other kind of democracy, or so it hasn't certainly worked very well. But it is noticed, or at least it's important to mention this, the political differences, political division led to theological differences, meaning that when they broke apart, Sunni Shia, then eventually along with it came theological differences. And we'll see those in a minute. And I think this is true too of, it's happened in Christianity when the Roman Empire broke apart. The East and the West. The Byzantine lasted a lot longer, but when this happened, when the West, in other words, Rome, and broke away from the Eastern Empire, which with its headquarters in Constantinople, then eventually some real theological differences came with it too. This has happened in Christianity, so it did happen in Islam, as we have mentioned. The Shiites, that means party or partisan. Ali was to be the caliph. They said, Muslims, some of them said he should have been the first caliph, but he didn't make it. And eventually he became the caliph in the fourth one. But he was a divine descendant, in other words, a direct descendant, and with that divine light. There's something mystical about it, isn't it? They wanted, some of them wanted a divine king. That's really what they wanted. Because they wanted justice, they wanted perfection, and I think again because of the lack of perfection in Iran that they've seen in some of the imams there has been a disillusionment, and that has been one of the factors, I think, for Iranian Muslims coming to Christ. There's been a disillusionment. There is a verse in the Quran where they would get some Shiites would want to refer to it. It's 2 and 124. It says that, remember, Abraham was tried by his Lord with certain commands which he fulfilled. He said, I will make thee an imam to the nations. Shiite says this shows that the Khalifa is a divine institution, and it must be, in the seed of Abraham. And so they say that the nature of the Caliphate is of divine nature. The Imam must be without spot, without sin. Who but Ali could be like that? So you see the mystical end of it, the mystical part of it. And the Shiites take verses of the Quran and they read into it interpretations that favor them. It's quite a mystical, esoteric interpretation that they give to it. They spiritualize things and read into it their own interpretations. And they feel persecuted, and they were persecuted. They feel that the injustice of these all-powerful people, like the Muhajirs and the Ansars, kept Ali from being caliph. They say that the caliphs poisoned the imams, perpetuating the persecution and the suffering. Notice the sentiment there of suffering and that has gone on for hundreds of years. It is noted that in some cases it seems like the Shiites worship Ali. You can go to a town like Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Pakistan, where there are mostly Shiites, and you can sense almost that they worship Ali. Totally different context than what you'd find in Sunni circles. Some years ago, when the Taliban were pretty strong in Afghanistan, they decided to really punish the Shiites. You see, they hated them. The Taliban are strong Sunnis. They hated the the Shiites in Mazar-e-Sharif, and so they really persecuted a lot of people there, killed a lot of people, and it was a very precarious time because Iran, being Shia, felt an affinity with the Shiite in Mazar-e-Sharif, and they moved their troops right out up to the border. It looked like they were going to come to blows, and had Iran entered, and if they had come in and rescued the Shiites in Mazar-e-Sharif and taken on the Taliban, they could have crushed them. Iran is a huge nation with a lot of power, but fortunately it didn't come to that. But you can see the closeness there between Mazar-e-Sharif, where there is a shrine of Ali. They say that Ali died there. I don't think of course he didn't, because he died in Iraq, where there is the, but that's the shrine to Ali in Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. Now here is a chart that shows the distribution of Sunni and Shiite Muslims. The percentage of Sunnis, and the dark areas are 75 to 99%. Notice how North Africa, much of the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, quite a bit of the Middle East is dark, and then you can get in areas of Pakistan as well, including Afghanistan and so on. But there are significant percentages of Shia. See the ones with the circle around them? There are percentages of Shia in parts of the world, including pockets here and there, all over the place, including even, in North Africa, or of course Iran, which is Shia, and Iraq, but places in Afghanistan or Pakistan, there are Shiites. Here is the large circle is 40 to 89%. The Muslim world is vast, with 1.3 billion Muslims, and if you take 10 or 15% of them, that's a lot of Shiites. It's well over 150, 200, perhaps 200 million people. That's a lot of people, and there are a lot of Shiites in the world. You get Shiites, and there's still Shiites in India, and pockets of Shiites in Indonesia, and where have you. So that shows you basically where the Sunnis and the Shia are. This one is much the same, but it's harder to read, so we're not going to spend much time on it. Percentage Sunni, percentage of Shia. Distribution of Sunni and Shia Muslims. Now, let's get on to the main differences. We talked about the major difference, which is which it has to do with who leads the Muslim community. But here we're going to talk about some difference. There are other differences as well. Number one, Shiites add a line to their prayer. What is it? It has to do with Ali, giving him honor, giving him the respect that he's due. And incidentally, I don't know that it's mentioned here, but when Shia Muslims die, and you have the interrogation in the grave, they call on Ali. They expect Ali to come to their aid, not Muhammad. Ali is the one that's close to their hearts. The Shiites pray 3 times a day, and so they don't do any less of the sets of prostration that we probably mentioned before, but they combine the 2 afternoon and the 2 evening prayers, so it turns out into a longer time. Shiites have this, what they call muta. Muta meaning that you can have temporary marriages. The Sunnis don't agree with this, but a Shia Muslim man can go to a city and he can be working there for 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is. Legally, he can have a temporary marriage. I will marry you, he says to some woman, perhaps widows or whoever it is. I will marry you for 3 months or so on, and so they live together as man and wife, and that's an agreement. We would call this prostitution, but that's what the Shiites agree to do. Again, the Imams have this spiritual link with God. This is very, very important. They think of the Mahdi coming back again to restore righteousness. And as already mentioned, they have their own interpretations of the Quran. They read into the verses. It's esoteric interpretation. Somebody is, for instance, they would say that, who can intercede? And there's one verse we read before that only, no one intercedes except God permits. Okay, the Shiites would say, well, who would that be? That would be Ali. They read into it, you see. There is the belief in Shia Islam where they allow for taqiyya. You can hide your faith because they've suffered. And so they can hide their faith, hide the fact that they're Shia. Shia can eat meat that has been not been slaughtered by Muslims. You see, they're more flexible. They would deny the prayers by an unworthy person. Shiites, by and large, hold to a created Quran, not the uncreated eternal Quran, which is really against logic. But the Shiites hold to a created. They believe in the Imams for justice, not the professional jurists that the Sunnis hold to. Some of the main differences. The Imamates, as we have discussed, is Iran. Ithna Sharia is the word for it. They are the majority in Iraq. But the trouble was that during Saddam Hussein, who was a Sunni, the Shiites, though they were in the majority, the Sunnis had the money. You remember that Saddam Hussein he favored them and he put them in positions of authority. And so they had the influence. They controlled the government. The problem is today is that the Shiites are basically going to be the ones who call the shots. And so the Sunnis are feeling very vulnerable. In the Iran-Iraq war in 1980 to 1988, it was almost like a Shia fighting a Sunni. Saddam Hussein is Sunni and Ayatollah Khomeini is Shia. So you had this deep resentment one against the other. What a difficult time. Both of them claimed to be fighting a jihad. And then their people who died in battle went to heaven. It doesn't quite make sense, but that's what happened during the Sunni-Shia war. And at that time, we favored Iraq. Later on, we had a sort of a run-in with Saddam Hussein. Then we turned against him, and eventually, after he invaded Kuwait, we didn't quite do the job then. So then George W. Bush went in, and as it were, took care of him. But it took a long time, and it hasn't gone well. This war in Iraq has really hardened the feeling of Muslims against us. The Sunnis are considered to be forsakers of the truth. You can see websites that are so I'm sorry, I'm talking now about the Sunnis and what they think of the Shiites. They think of these Shiites as forsakers of the truth, and the websites are so they're vitriolic. They're very harsh against the Sunnis. I've heard Muslims in Pakistan say, Sunnis say that as far as they're concerned, it's the Shiites that have caused all the trouble. When I was in Pakistan in 1979, there was an incident that happened on November the 20th when, during the time of the pilgrimage, there was someone who stood up in the mosque having smuggled arms and everything into the Kaaba and hidden them there, and had 300 followers with well armed, and this guy stood up and said, "I am the Mahdi. It ended in very, very serious bloodshed, but before it ended, in fact, just when it got started, the rumor went out that the Kaaba had been taken over by Americans and Jews. Saudi Arabia had cut off all communications from the outer world, and so the effect of it was felt all over the place. And we were sitting ducks in Pakistan, and we were attacked by Muslims who were taking revenge. This was only a false rumor. We forgave our enemies, and later the Muslims said to me, the neighbors said to me, now we understand the difference between you and us. You forgive your enemies. We don't forgive anyone. So that's the 1979 incident with the Al-Mahdi. The Shiites say that the 12th Imam will come back again. He will restore justice. You see, they're pining for justice. They feel that they have been treated unjustly throughout history by the powerful Sunnis. They have suffered. They've been persecuted. The Sunnis say that the 12th Imam never appeared, and he never will appear. But some Sunnis say that Jesus will rule by the Sharia, and that is in the Quran too, and in the Hadith. There is a statement in the Quran that, in fact, it refers to it in 4 and 159. It says that, talks about how wonderful Jesus is, and there is none of the people of the book but must believe in him before his death on the day of judgment. Now, let's forget the other stuff. It says on the day of judgment, he, that is Jesus, will be a witness against them. So Jesus will be there as judge. Now, the commentator has a long explanation here as to how Jesus appears and so on and on. But nevertheless, there he is. Jesus is there. And 43 and verse 61, here's another one. And Jesus shall be a sign for the coming of the hour of judgment. Therefore have no doubt about the hour, but follow me. This is a straight way. You know, Muhammad didn't realize or didn't think that he was any different than what the religion of Jesus and so on. He didn't realize it. And Jesus is in Islamic eschatology. He's there. We've looked at that before. It's quite significant, isn't it? We've looked at the Ismailis, the Seminars, and we've talked about the esoteric meanings, the tendency of Shiites to follow the Imam in blind faith. I mentioned too that in the interrogation or the Inquisition, when the dead person, the deceased, is questioned by the angels, the question will be, did you recognize the Imam? Not so much about Muhammad, but about Ali. Did you recognize him? So you do have Shiites. You do have Shiites in Pakistan, India, Central Asia, Syria, East Africa. Even among the Uyghurs, some are Shiite. And the Imam Aga Khan, who is one of the richest people in the world, when we were traveled up into northern Pakistan, in the Hunza area, there were pictures of him all over the place. He is the Imam, almost worshipped. He has been very good to them, to the people in Hunza, with his wealth. These are Shiites. Now the Zadis are the Fivers. These are the most moderate Shiites, but they have their own school of law. They accept Abu Bakr, Umar, and the Caliphates, but they split over Uthman. They didn't think very much of him. In Yemen, that little country down there in the bottom part of very, very poor place on the bottom of Saudi Arabia, where there is so much trouble. And then just a few years ago, remember that a couple of, IMB people were killed in the hospital there. The hospital had had the Baptists have a hospital there for many years. They are Zaydis there, but there are also some very violent Muslims down there.